watched the tool sharpening PowerPoint, you should be somewhat familiar with some of these things, hopefully. If not, you may want to go back through and kind of watch that. But I'll try to tell you everything that you need to know as far as that stuff goes. So right here we do have a bench grinder. These things have 2 different wheels. We have a little kind of a medium, and then we have a fine wheel over here. We're really going to kind of focus on this fine wheel on this project because when we're tool sharpening, when we're trying to recondition these tools and get them back into good condition, the fine wheel is going to give us a smoother grind. It's going to just be a lot easier. It's going to be a lot cleaner, and it's going to make life a little bit easier for us. So we do have a cold chisel that we're going to sharpen. We do have a center punch that we're going to sharpen, and then we've got a drill bit. I've got a big drill bit over here that I'm going to use to kind of demonstrate because sometimes the details on these things can be a little bit difficult to see. So I'll use this one, but I'm not going to actually sharpen it. I'm just going to kind of show you the angles and show you some different things with this one, and then we'll go to this drill bit right here. If you are sharpening drill bits, anywhere between maybe like 3/8 and 1/2 of an inch in size is a pretty good size to be able to sharpen. If you're new and you're inexperienced with this. It's easy enough for you to see the stuff, okay, but it's not too big that it's overwhelming. Okay, and it's not too small that it's really hard. You can sharpen really any size drill bit, but I found that 3/8 to 1/2 inch are probably the ideal range to really kind of get practice and start. We do have a quench tank right here. This is just a little coffee can with some water in there. If you watch the tool sharpening video, you'll know that when we are sharpening these things, we're going to be creating heat. I'm going to try to get some discoloration in here, and I'll show you kind of what that looks like. And if we're overheating these things. But essentially, as we're grinding these things and it's creating that friction, it's heating this metal up, what we need to do is we need to quench this into that tank. And what that quenching does is it tempers the end of this bit, or the end of your center punch, or the cutting tips of your drill bit. That makes it hard, but the metal becomes brittle with that. And so what we don't want to do is we don't want to heat up this whole piece right here and then cool it down. We're really just heating up the tip, and we're dipping the tip in. So you may see that every once in a while. You may see me pull away, you may see me dip that, but I'll show you kind of what the discoloration and stuff looks like. You guys made one of these, although it was a paper one, it really is the same kind of thing. But this is the tool sharpening gauge. The nice thing with this is we can use these things to determine if we have the proper angles. Okay, that's the angle right there. We can kind of see they match up fairly close. That one matches up fairly close. You can see just this angle. We're not worried about this, and it doesn't have to fill that whole gap up in there. We're just making sure that the tip of these things are going to match those angles. Much like the drill bit, same kind of thing. Okay, we've got some details that we're going to focus on, but this is the area that we're going to check. So this tool sharpening gauge that you guys built is going to be used to just kind of make sure that we're holding the right angles and everything is looking good. The last thing that we have right here is a stone dresser, okay? And this thing is going to take a wheel and make sure that it's square. What we do with this, you've got these little foot pegs right here. You set that on top of this tool rest, and then these little blades, they just kind of freely spin. These are just the steel. And then what you do is you move this thing back and forth, and it grinds down this wheel. You get a groove in this. If you're grinding and you're holding this thing in one spot, it's going to create a groove. It's going to wear down that one area, and it's not going to wear down that whole wheel. So as much as possible, we try to make sure that we use the full face of this grinding wheel to make sure that we're grinding it nice and even. If not, we take our stone dresser and we do that. These wheels are pretty square, but I'm going to show you what it looks like. It does create a lot of dust. It does get stuff all over the place, but none of this stuff is like going to hurt your hands. None of the sparks that fly off are going to hurt your hands. Some people are kind of timid with that, but I want to show you what this stone dresser does and how quickly it takes stuff down. We're going to go ahead and turn this thing on by flipping that switch. Notice we've got lights on this thing. It makes it nice, makes it easy to see. What we do with two hands, we're going to hold this thing on, and then all I'm going to do is just push this into that grinding wheel. You might see some dust that comes off, okay, and that's just that grinding wheel that's coming down. You'll notice we shut this off. We let this thing come to a complete stop. We don't walk away from these things while they're spinning. It doesn't take them very long. I don't put something in there. I don't try to stop it with my hands. Notice that thing's already stopped now. If there is any grooves, or if there was any grooves, those things are now out. That wheel is now square, and that's going to give us our best chance to be able to sharpen these tools effectively. So on this cold chisel, we have two sides to this, and this one's probably one of the easier ones to sharpen. I'm going to try to see if I can't get a good shot. Now, a lot of times what happens with these things, because these cold chisels, we actually take them and we use them to kind of cut tacks off when we're welding. We can actually cut real thin metal with these things. You know, they're essentially going up and they're being hammered against another piece of steel. And what happens over time is these things will start to dull and they'll start to wear out. And you can kind of see on this one, we don't really have a fine point. You kind of see there's a little bit of dulling, there's a little bit of bending that's kind of going on. Most of the time, this is what it looks like. It's not going to be completely flat. It's going to already kind of have the angles that are going to match up with our tool sharpening gauge. And all you really need to do is just kind of grind these things down and kind of follow that same angle. And what we're going to do is we're going to hold this thing in this position. We're going to kind of hold that up. We're not really going to use that tool rest. I'm going to use my hands to kind of make sure. And all I'm going to do is just run this thing back and forth. I can change the angle by dropping it or raising it, okay? And that's going to change the angle of these two angles that we have right here. I don't want to do that. And most of the time, that's not what you want to do. That's where a lot of students really kind of mess up, is they want to try to change the angle that's already there. The angle is good. The angle's there. It exists. The only thing that really happens is this tip gets dull, and we just have to resharpen this. One thing we want to try to avoid, see if I can see it right here. Notice on this side how it's wider. That kind of shiny part is wider than this side. It's very subtle. It's not a whole lot, but this side is definitely short. The reason for that is when we're grinding this thing, if we have a slight twist to this, or if we're kind of favoring it just a little bit, maybe we're grinding a little bit heavier on one side, we want to make sure that when you're doing that, if you notice that, you want to maybe kind of twist this thing the opposite way. So if this one is bigger here and smaller there, what I probably need to do is I need to twist this thing this direction. I'm kind of over exaggerating that twist. When I'm twisting it, it's like you're kind of sitting right here, or you're heavily grinding on one side, it's going to very lightly grind this back side. Okay, so whatever side is heavier, not when you're looking at it, but kind of away from you, that's the heavy side, that's the light side. You just want to twist this thing that way and put a little bit more pressure on it. That's honestly the toughest thing with sharpening these cold chisels. So you don't want to put your fingers in there, but you can use this tool rest to kind of have your fingers kind of, help it kind of slide. Okay, not necessarily the tool. We're not putting the tool on there. And all we're going to do is just essentially try to hold that angle. You can see we have kind of a nice shiny thing. I have a little bit right here where I didn't grind down. I don't know if the camera's going to pick that up. You can see kind of where it's shiny and where it's not. Probably just need to hit that a little bit more. Now we don't have those angles. It's a nice, flat, kind of smooth angle. When I grind one side, I need to make sure I grind the other. This thing's starting to get a little bit hot, so I'm just going to kind of dump that in there. And I'm going to grind the other side, so I'm just kind of rotating that around. You can see right here, you can see how there's two different angles. On the very top corner right here, I don't know if you can see the kind of shininess. Can you see where it's kind of dull there, where it's kind of shiny? I'm just not hitting that tip. Okay, so I need to kind of, as I'm sitting like this, I need to kind of twist it this way a little bit. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to hit that a little bit more on the other side. You see now I kind of missed that one a little bit. So I'm just going to kind of go back and forth a little bit. I'm going to hit one side, I'm going to hit the other. Trying to make sure it's a nice flat surface. Cooling these things down every once in a while. We got a little bit right here where we got two different angles in there. Ideally, we want that to be smooth. We got it right there. So we're just going to hit it a little bit more. Try to even them out. Okay. So notice now that's even. Notice our tip right here. Let me show you. Our tip right here, we've got a little bit of burrs on the very end. So I'm just going to kind of hit this real lightly on both sides, kind of get those burrs off. I'm not pushing in real far. Now we've got a nice sharp point. It's not dull at all. Okay. One thing I want to show you is if we're getting too much heat into this stuff, so I'm just going to kind of grind this, kind of mess this thing up. I'm going to show you if we've got too much heat. So you may see a little bit of discoloration, and if it gets real bad, it'll start turning kind of like a bluish. You can kind of see there's a little bit of blue in here. So again, we have kind of our dull tip that's right there. Man, I can't see now. I can't see anything. And then what we're going to do is kind of move this thing back and forth. We're going to flip it over. We'll grind those sides. Quench it in the tank. Kind of cool that down. You'll notice on this, I'm a little bit smaller here. So that means I need to kind of twist it this way a little bit as I'm going. Cool this thing down again. We'll hit both sides. That looks a lot better. A little bit more even now. Then we'll hit this back side here too. One more time. And you can see there, I'll go ahead and shut this thing off. So we've got our nice sharp point back into there again. Okay. That thing, again, it will dull over time. We quench those things down, but it's pretty basic. Hold those same angles. Make sure we're not changing things too much. Okay. You kind of see that fits in there pretty good. Again, we're not looking at the angle up here. We're looking at just that angle right there. And if it's not exactly perfect, it doesn't matter, but we don't want this tip to be really blunt, and we don't want it to be a real kind of steep kind of angle. Okay. So if we change this and we just kind of go at the same angle that we had before, typically that's going to be more than enough for what we want here. So the center punch, we're going to work on this thing now. Typically what happens with these center punches, we've seen these things, we've used them, right? We use them to mark and make a little indentation in metal, so that way our drill bit will have a guide to be able to guide it. So typically what happens on these, you can see I just kind of ground down that tip, but that's what happens with these things. That tip just gets dull, and then we just have to resharpen. Now with this one, it's a little bit different than the cold chisel. It's not as hard as the drill bit, but there are some things that we have to do when we're actually grinding. So it's almost the same exact angle that we had. So we're going to kind of do the same kind of process. We're going to hold this thing up against that the grinding wheel, but instead of going at just a back and forth motion, what we're going to do is we're going to be spinning this drill bit or this center punch. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come into that wheel. So I'm going to come into this wheel, and before I actually have touched that wheel, I'm going to start spinning this thing kind of slowly. And then I'm gonna have so much spin in my hands before I have to like stop and like readjust my hands. So before I have to stop spinning, kind of see I'm spinning this thing now. Before I have to stop spinning, I'm gonna pull this thing away. So that way I'm continuously spinning. And that's gonna give us this nice conical shape where it's gonna be smooth. Yeah, I think I'm just gonna do it. I'll show you what it'll look like. So essentially we kind of hold that angle. We're gonna start spinning this thing. Notice how I kind of use the wheel. I kind of stop, I'll back up. And I kind of repeat this process until I end up with a nice smooth finish on that whole thing. You'll notice here, you see how it looks really smooth. Those lines, I don't know if you can see those lines. So it's a nice smooth finish. We don't really have any side that's going to be flat. What happens where a lot of people really kind of mess up with these things is they start grinding here and they turn it and they hold it and they end up with a flat spot. Just pick that up. Be nice if it did. We'll try that again here. So if you're not spinning it, what you're going to end up with is going to be a flat spot in there. Can you see how that's flat right there? I kind of turn it on right on the side right here. That piece is kind of flat. It's not that rounded, kind of smooth round. You can kind of see it again right there. You can see it on that side where it's kind of flat. If I start to spin this, now you kind of start to see it just kind of take its shape. Avoiding that flat spot is the key to these things. Just kind of keep these things spinning as it's touching the grinding. So we'll go ahead and we'll try to fix that. We'll dunk it in. It's getting a little bit warm. Could be just short little bursts like this. I just kind of back it up to make sure I grind what I just kind of feather both grindings in. You can see we got a pretty even kind of cone shape there. Okay, there's a little bit of a flat spot right there. So I'm kind of working it one way. I'm kind of sliding this thing across that wheel. It's just important to make sure that this thing is spinning before you touch the wheel and as you pull it off the wheel. If you don't do that, that's where you're going to get those flat spots. We got a nice little tip on there. We'll quench that thing down. Make sure that we kind of temper that end there. The rest of this stuff really doesn't get that warm, and so if you kind of dunk that down, it's really only that hot spot. That's just kind of that tip right where we're grinding that actually gets cooled down. Now the one that's a little bit more complicated. You guys don't have questions on cold chisel or the set punch, do you? Pretty simple, self-explanatory almost. So the drill bit, this is where a lot of people are going to struggle. And on this big one, I'm going to kind of show you some things that we are going to want to do. One, this right here, this little edge right there that you see, get you a side view here, that edge right there, that is our cutting. That is what's going to be cutting or drilling into the metal on this drill bit. There are two of them. There's one here. Let's flip this thing over. There's also another one right here. So there are two cutting lips. You're going to have to, like the cold chisel, you're going to have to grind one side, and then you're going to have to grind the other. If we look here, we've got our cutting lip. This is called the heel. If you'll notice on this drill bit, notice how this cutting lip kind of drops down that heel. Ideally, it should be a 12% change, but my rule of thumb is as long as that cutting lip is higher than any part. And what we're looking at here, just to kind of emphasize a little bit more, you see that shiny part that we have right there? It's this line that I'm kind of following, okay, where it transitions from a dark to that shiny. That's what I'm looking at, and I'm trying to make sure that that's going to drop. I'm holding the drill bit up like this. My cutting lip should be the highest part, and then it should all gradually just drop down. It shouldn't kind of raise up and then drop down. Okay, it shouldn't go like this and then kick back up. Okay, that heel and everywhere in between that heel and that cutting lip should gradually just get lower and lower. Okay. If at any point this line goes up above where that cutting lip is at, on this drill bit, when we come into this, instead of doing this at an angle like we did the other two, what we're going to do is we're going to hold this thing level. You don't want to kick this thing up. You don't want to drop this thing down. You want that drill bit level. Okay. So that's kind of the first thing when you're holding this, is you want that drill bit to be level. Not kicked up, not kicked down, level. We're talking about this top part right here. The other thing that you need is this cutting lip to be level. Okay. Does that look like a cutting lip is pretty level right there? I would say that it is, right? Notice how if I twist this, see how I twist that? See how that cutting lip is now kind of facing down? Notice how I go over here, I could kind of twist that out. So your cutting lip also has to be level. I'll have a good shot that'll kind of show you that in just a second. Okay, so you're level here and your cutting lip is level. So right now, you guys may not be able to see this very well, okay, but my drill bit should be level and my cutting lip should be level as well. The other thing that you're going to do, notice this little line that we have there. That line is basically the line from the tool sharpening gauge, and that's the angle that we're going to want to hold our drill bit at. So we're going to hold that, and we're going to look at that. We're going to visually see that line. We're going to make sure that our drill bit is at that angle with our drill bit level, our cutting bit level, and then we're going to be able to drive this thing in and get this grinding. If you don't set those things up right, you're not going to sharpen these drill bits correctly. Once we have those things, what we're going to do, and I'll show you a different view as well. We're going to kind of take our finger, we're going to pinch it up underneath here. We're going to glide our finger across the tool rest. I'm supporting the backside with my other hand, kind of make sure that it's not pitching, that they're both going in conjunction, and you're holding an angle. You don't want to do it like this. You want to slide. Can you see the difference there? We want to slide this. So what we're going to do when we have the cutting lip flat, we have the drill bit flat, we're going to take this and we're going to push it in, and then we're going to move it side to side. And when we move it side to side, it's grinding this little kind of front piece right there down. So there's like a two-step process. The first step is getting this thing in, moving it side to side. And then what we do, once we do that a couple times, you're going to kind of drop this drill bit. So you're no longer going to hold this drill bit level. You're going to take this, move it side to side. You're going to drop this drill bit, and you're just going to kind of follow this wheel up. And when you do that, it's going to grind this heel. It's going to grind that stuff down. So it's going to take that cutting lip, it's going to grind it down to where it's nice and flat, nice and sharp again. Because these parts, this is what gets dull on these, is that cutting lip. And then the back and forth sharpens it, and the lift up takes that heel, and it drops that heel down. So top view here. Come on. All right. I'm not going to turn this light on because I don't want this thing to work. So our cutting lip, right, that needs to be level. And what we're looking for on this top view is for it to kind of match up against it. Notice how, see that line there on this tool rest? That's the angle that we want. Most of the time, all you want to do is just line this up with that drill bit. If this drill bit was from the manufacturer and nobody else sharpened it, that angle is not going to change. So literally just line this drill bit up with that angle, okay? Just like this. And then you're just going to grind this thing down until you start seeing sparks come over this cutting right there. Once you do that, then you can kind of lift it up and you can drop this angle down. You can take this heel. So what I do is I go back and forth. I drop this thing down, and I always give it just a slight twist, like that much of a twist. That's not very much. I give it a slight little twist to kind of get the rest of that heel. But what I don't want to do is I don't want to get this cutting lip into that grinding wheel and grind down this. Okay, so it's just level on your cutting lip, level on your drill bit, back and forth, lift it up, and then a slight twist at the end. And that's going to take that heel and it's going to drop that thing down. What is that thinking? So, yeah, I think we're going to try it. We'll try to mess with things. You know what? I'm going to try to lift it. What a lot of people tend to do, here's a decent example of this. Notice how steep this is. Notice how that doesn't match up with that angle at all. A lot of students want to take this thing and they want to kick this bit this way. In reality, what you want to do is you actually want to grind it. You want to take it more like this, more square to the wheel. A lot of them want to create kind of a teeth. You don't want that real sharp point. Okay, so this is kind of a good example. This one is one of these. I have a set of drill bits here that we typically will sharpen and stuff, and so some of them are really bad. And I'll typically help students because, like I said, most of the time. Oh, there's another bad one right there. And you see how that one's kind of like a real kind of sharp point to it. There's really nothing there. You want to kind of square this up to that way. Using these lines, that's from our tool sharpening gauge. Using those lines. But most of the time, we have a drill bit. The tip of this one's messed up, and they're typically not going to see that, but I just dull it by just tipping into there. But we have angles. Okay? We have that stuff. All you want to do is really just follow the same angles. There's another drill bit. Just keep that same angle that we had. What dulls on these things is literally just this cutting. That's the only thing that dulls is that cutting. The rest of that drill bit should be fine. You do have to, as you grind down to get a nice sharp cutting lip, you do have to grind your heel down every time. So you can't skip that process. Now, when I grind these things down, what I want to do is I want this thing to match up with that angle, and it does that. And then I can take my tape measure that I have here, or the markings actually. I can see that one's about a 1/4 of an inch. If I flip this thing around, that one is quite a bit smaller. And I don't know if you can see that. I can definitely tell that this side is longer than this just by looking at it. What that does, that puts my tip off center. So what do I need to do to get that tip back in the center? Do I grind my shorter one, or do I need to grind my longer piece there? You got to grind the shorter. Now, sometimes that might seem counterintuitive that you need to grind the shorter one to make it longer. But because we're dealing with two kind of opposing angles, as you grind the shorter one, it's going to shorten the longer one and increase the length on the short one. Okay? So we're going to do this. We're just going to grind this side, make sure we got angles. Once you start getting these things close, really what it comes down to is just a matter of fine-tuning. I'm just going to do two real quick ones. Notice if they're already pretty much there, I don't have to sit there and go back and forth for a very long time. Notice down in the middle, we have this thing called the margin. Notice how there is a line. Yeah, see that line right there? It is not going to be a point. You do not want it to be a point. You want that, okay, or I think that's called the web. The margin is kind of the end. So that's the web of these things. They're never going to be a point. They're going to have a line that goes down there. But that's where our center punches really come in, where we make a center punch mark. And as long as that center punch mark is bigger than that web right there, or this line that you see right there, as long as it's bigger than that, that is going to guide this drill bit and keep it walking. As it starts cutting, it's going to cut deeper and deeper and deeper. We've got nice sharp edges. They are not dull at all. What happens, again, let's show you both sides. Now, on these things, if we're grinding and we do a little too much of a twist at the end, notice how this one, that cutting lip looks good. Notice our heel drops right there. But notice if I turn this, can you see that tip right there? I ground down that other tip. When I twisted that, can you see that? I think you guys can. You can see that coloration. Notice how this one is like just kind of smooth. There's no shininess right there on that edge, right on that cutting. But right here, notice how it's shiny. I turned it too much and I ground that down. So now what I need to do, because I messed that up, we'll quench this thing I need to kind of hit that side and grind it. I've got to make sure that I am staying even on these pieces. So if I get one side, I'm going to make sure I hit the other to make sure that I have a nice even grind. Notice pretty quickly we were able to, oh, looks like we got a little bit more we need to kind of grind. We'll hit this one. And then we'll hit the other side to kind of make sure it stays even. And I'll finish that. So pretty quickly, we got a nice good cutting edge right there. We've got that heel that drops. We've got a nice good cutting edge right there. We've got that other heel that drops. If we were to take this up to our gauge, we should be even. Yeah, we look like we're even on this. If the drill bit just has a little bit of stuff that's wrong with it, it doesn't take very much to grind these things and to sharpen them up. You kind of mess it up and you take it out, then it's going to take more grinding. I'll go ahead and I'll show you a top view of this right now. So that way you can kind of see how I'm lining these things up. Again, that cutting lip needs to be flat. And you're just watching, see how the sparks start to fly over the top? That's when we know we got that ground down. We've got a nice kind of smooth feature. Okay, we'll do the same thing on the other side. We'll hold those angles. Sparks are flying across that whole top. We'll raise that stuff up. And if we're really smooth, you'll notice it's just kind of a nice kind of smooth transition. Kind of like the center punch there. We look like we're even. We look like we've got these things in there. And we're good with that. Now, I'm going to take this bit. And this bit is just really messed up. It doesn't resemble anything close to this. You see kind of those angles. You see that. There's no cutting lip. No, look how steep that is compared to this one. Okay. And you kind of look right here with the tip versus there. That cutting lip should not be that steep. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to move over to this one here. Because this one should be a little bit more aggressive. See how the sparks are bigger? We're going to really grind this thing down. We're going to try to hit both sides if we can. We're going to get our discoloration that I wanted. I'm going to leave it. I'm not going to quench it. I should quench it right now, but I'm not going to. And notice how much more I'm having to grind on this. And I'm not hitting those things down at all. Can you see that kind of purplish yellow kind of color on that tip right there? That's getting a little too much heat. Notice we don't have as steep as an angle. We do have our heel that's kind of kicking up a little bit. Hold on. Focus camera. Okay, can you see that heel kind of kicks up? Because I was just going back and forth trying to grind those things down. I'm going to cool this thing down. I'm going to hit this a little bit more. Might just do it on the side here. Back and forth. The slower you go on the lift up, the more it's going to take that heel and drop it. Getting a lot of heat built up, so we'll pull it down. I'm kind of pushing this thing in quite a bit because it needs it. I got a lot of material on here to kind of take off to get this thing back to where it should be. We'll do probably one more. One more sharpen and then that'll be okay. We'll take it to the other wheel. Switch that. Can you see how we've kind of taken that angle? It's not as steep, right? It's quite a bit flatter. That's more of what we want to see on this thing. That's more of what we're trying to look for. So now that we've got that, you guys positioned here, we'll go to our fine wheel. Let those sparks kind of come off that edge, lift up and a slight twist. See, we've got a nice, kind of smooth kind of finish there. That heel is dropping. We're not as aggressive. We're not taking as much stuff off, which is exactly what we want. This side that we're going to do. You can see, there we go. That's a good view. See that heel drops. This side, it kind of like has a little bit of an arch, but that cutting lip is still higher right there. That's what we're looking for. We don't have any grinding away of our cutting lip. We're not turning it too much. That heel drops. Okay. I would say by looking at this thing, those look like they're pretty even. If you've got a good eye, you can kind of see that and you can tell what happens. Right. Kind of there, kind of get a point. Flip that around. Yeah, that looks like it's even. That drill bit will drill for us. Okay. It didn't take very long. Okay, but again, if you have these things, you're typically not going to have something that is going to be really bad off. You're going to have something that's got that cutting lip is just a little bit dull because it's worked, it's been used, and so you're going to see a little bit of dullness in there. Really, just following the same angles, yeah, back and forth, lift up, and slight twist at the end to make sure that that heel drops. And that's really how we sharpen.